Hey, everybody. Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Same here. It's been an amazing day yesterday, and I'm looking forward to kind of continuing on today. So it's good to see a lot of familiar faces and friends out there, both from the NABSIG days and certainly state and local days as well. So it's good to be up here and have a chance to talk a little bit. You know, I was thinking about how to kick this off, and I was thinking back to last night during the lightning talks and all the GIS adoption that was going on last night around the room. And so I was trying to think about should I just try to figure out how to work GIS into every slide or every sentence. I thought that might be kind of bad to do. So then I realized, what better way to say GIS than to say today is GIS day? Yeah, all right. So my new proposition is that I've given you something to use throughout the rest of the day, and specifically tonight at the awards dinner is to say Happy GIS Day and carry on the tradition going forward. But, you know, joking aside, I think this is pretty amazing for us. I think thanks, Rebecca, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation, but also thanks for scheduling me on GIS Day so I could use this chance. So why is GIS Day important? And I actually plugged this in without realizing last night was obviously going to be the GIS joke, which was great, by the way. But what I love about GIS Day is that there are thousands of organizations around the world that are having meetings just like this today, talking about how they transform organizations with technology like GIS. Certainly challenges that they face, they're sharing common use patterns, they're looking for ways to kind of advance their learning, and really spatial literacy, right? That's the core of why GIS Day was started 20 years ago, was just to advance the idea that there's a different way to approach problems, to think more holistically about the problems that we face, and that geography, right, the science of geography, allows us to expose different patterns that we would have never seen before without the use of maps and applications that we've seen today, and some great examples from South Carolina and others yesterday. So that's really what GIS Day is about. And so, you know, the talk that we positioned here was like the idea of how do we see what others can't, right? And some of you have probably anybody seen the commercials that Esri's been doing recently online? So, yeah, a few people. That's different, but I actually like this phrase, see what others can't, because how many of you that work in GIS have to answer the question, because it's almost Thanksgiving, what do you do for a living again? Do you make maps? Right, what is that GIS thing? And I love this, because actually I think being able to say we help people see what others can't is actually really appropriate if you think about it. It's like we use a technology called GIS, and we use our science and spatial literacy and the thinking that we all bring to solve challenges for, in our case, public safety operations. We help them solve mission-critical problems. We help them understand what impact might look like. We help them understand where to pre-position resources from a technology side. And without that, how do you start to really see what others can't? How do you actually know how to take action in an effective way without just relying on historic knowledge alone? And I'll talk more about what that is. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about for seeing what others can is this idea of innovation. And I loved yesterday in the talk that we had, I think Rebecca made a great point in her comments, was that, you know, innovation in and of itself is good, right? It's not a bad thing. But if it's unchecked, it's uncontrolled, it actually introduces a lot of risk. So when is the worst time to introduce something new? During an event. How many times has that become the innovation tipping point for something to take over? A lot. So it's like this kind of the seesaw motion of like, we take advantage of the opportunities in front of us to innovate, to introduce a new tool, to solve a problem that wasn't previously solved because we had to. And the other side is that we just introduced a new process, a new workflow, that how do we continue to really move that forward, to sustain what we just had the chance to change? And so actually I would propose today a little bit different terminology for my talk, which is that what I'd like to express, and not in a technology term today, is about how we actually digitally transform our agencies moving forward. That involves innovation. It's the ability to take advantage of new technologies and certainly innovate the way that we approach processes. But really it's about sustaining it and doing it programmatically and very pragmatically, so that innovation actually becomes an enabler and a positive force of change for your agency, not a hindrance. You know, another term that I have a chance to talk to a few folks about recently was this idea that innovation in of itself is not good, right? In Silicon Valley, if you look at technology companies, and Esri is in that boat as well, I'd put us there, is that moving fast and failing fast is a positive thing in software development sometimes. I would say in public safety where we work, that's a negative as well. Moving fast and failing fast puts lives and property at risk. So again, back to innovation. If we think about digital transformation, innovation becomes a process. We're going to talk about how you can start to look at problems more holistically, and I'd like to lay out just a bit of a thinking that we've established working with a lot of you in the room to say this is an approach to how you actually do that together and transform organizations moving forward so that you are innovative, you are using new technology, but they're actually approaching it to solve your specific mission problems in a very pragmatic approach to that. Now, I certainly want to talk a little bit about just the world that we live in, right? Being that we are here in the Innovation Summit, and we're talking about resilience. I want to hit on that a little bit today too. But we've seen good examples. I think even the professors speaking at the very beginning talking about Harvey for him here in the Houston area and his family and how the personal impact of that is just one clear example of that. But if you look at data globally, just take ourselves out of the Galveston area and Houston area, back to where you live every day, I guarantee you that you're seeing things differently. Things are happening differently. And this data set actually covers global disasters that have been reported from 1970 all the way through to 2018. And now, just like anything, the stock market, right, our ups and downs at work and everything else in life, things ebb and flow. But if you look at the general trend, I think we can all agree that things are trending in an upward fashion. That's the trend line against the data set for this, data set from 70 to 2018 about the number of events, the number of incidents and crises and disasters. So some of us call it job security, but it also means that we have to figure out a way to respond more quickly. We have to be able to step up to the challenge because our people are counting on us, right? Our citizens are counting on us. Now, if you go even deeper and just look into the data, Jack pulled a slide up in her presentation about the 2019 billion-dollar weather events. Rebecca had one on the 2018 billion-dollar weather events from NOAA. But I actually pulled those away and say, without just looking at a map for a second, let's just look at the data behind that. So for the year 2018, $91 billion went out to response and recovery. That's a lot of money. Not the highest year on record, but it's a lot of money. But what I took away more than the amount of money was the second line. 80% of that $91 billion was from 3 events. Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Florence, and the Cant Fire in California. So 3 events. And in fact, if you look at the Cant Fire, $24 billion of that was wrapped up in wildfire response. So no matter what type of hazard you're exposed to in your local jurisdiction, whether it's flooding, earthquakes, fires, you name it, it's getting badder, it's getting more costly, and it certainly means that we have to step up to the plate and think a little bit differently about how we're going to approach problems that we have just let fester for a bit. It's about how do we transform, how do we step up and do that. So to bring it back for a minute, just because I can't ignore Harvey, because I live here in the Houston Metroplex, and it was a personal event for me as well. Harvey was a tipping point in the way that I thought about innovation and digital transformation, even as a technologist, right, working in GIS and government. And the reason I say that is because we have friends and family all over the Houston area. Some of you heard my story before about how we actually were trying to help a friend's family evacuate or know whether they should evacuate or not from a neighborhood that was actually, as the crow flies, about 60 miles away from us. Remember, this was a huge area, New England size, if we think about it in scope and scale of the event itself. And they were asking me, because on the news around here in Houston, they were saying this subsection, this street of this neighborhood is to evacuate or not. In this case, my best friend's brother-in-law was trying to evacuate or trying to understand if he should. They couldn't find a map. The TVs and satellites were going in and out. And they were asking me, because they know I work in GIS and maps and in government, they're like, hey, you should know where he's at. It's a map. And I'm like, I have no idea what his neighborhood is. I have no idea what a street name is. I don't know. So in the middle of all that, just to be clear, it's like certainly Harvey from a hazard perspective and the way that we approach hurricanes changed the story. We've heard that already. But what changed the story for me was actually a technology part of that story, because in the middle of that chaos, in the middle of the text messages flying around trying to help my friend's brother-in-law figure out whether they should get out or not, suddenly on the news, anybody from Fort Bend County here in the room with us today? Somebody close by? Close by, okay. So thanks for being close by, because Fort Bend County offered up a web map. And on the news, they actually just had it literally on the screens like you see every day. They had somebody standing in front of it, and it was a web application that showed evacuation zones. Type in an address, and we'll tell you what the evacuation status is. And so all I could do at the time was literally, I took my phone out, I took a picture of the TV, I zoomed into the web address, and I sent a text message to my friend and said, send this to your brother-in-law, have them type in the address, put in their address, and it'll immediately tell them where they're at. And they were next to the Brazos River, for those of us that know Southeast Texas. There was levee failures at risk and things like that. And so for me, actually being on the other side of that equation, instead of trying to build maps and tell people how they should help, I actually got the benefit of seeing what somebody that actually answered a mission critical problem was, communicating with the public in this case can really make a difference. So we can talk about digital transformation and all sorts of things, but I think being practical about understanding the problems at hand, how we develop solutions that solve those really practical things is so important. So I don't want to lose sight of that as we talk about innovation, and we don't want to lose sight of that we talk about things like machine learning and virtual reality. All those things are great. Even as a technologist, I love them, but I'm not going to talk about any of that today. So if you're thinking about Esri's going to come up and talk about those next generation AV and VR and all those things, I'm not going to talk today. I'd love to talk to you later, but that's not really what today is about. For me, I'm going to talk about the new normal in the sense of how do we actually do this better for each of our agencies tomorrow when we go back to work. So I wanted you to think for a minute. So each of you just pause. I've talked a lot about hazards and each of us in different areas. So think for just a minute about what keeps you up at night. I love that question. There's a group that I work with a lot, and that's how they open every meeting is what keeps you up at night? But I want you to think about it from a perspective of like, what's the risk that you're thinking about right now? Because each of you are from geographically dispersed areas across the globe. We have friends from New Zealand, we have folks from Trinidad. So what is it that you're thinking about? Certainly it may be because we've just talked about hurricanes. You're thinking, hey, how do I prepare for the next big hurricane that's coming on shore? And I want to think about how I can do things differently the next time. You may be thinking about flooding, right? Whether that's inland flooding for those that work in the Midwest. This is a seasonal thing. You're probably already getting ready for the next season of flooding, even though it's now November and we're already getting ahead. Pretty holistic problem. For those that work in law enforcement, our brethren there, you're probably thinking about the acts of terrorism, right? Active shooting incidents that have been all over the news and continue to just exacerbate, it seems like every day, the problem that we have. And again, not to ignore Texas because that's where we're from. When I put this slide together 2 years ago, I thought I wouldn't have to talk about this again, but the fact that as you drove into Galveston, you drove 20 miles past Santa Fe High School where there was a shooting recently, if you remember that in the news. You actually passed it on the way into Galveston. Sutherland Springs Church was in Texas not that long ago either, a year ago. October of 2019, sorry, or 2018, excuse me. And then certainly on the left-hand side, this was the serial bomber that was between Austin and San Antonio. Right, so if you're thinking about terrorism events or acts of terrorism and how we protect our citizens, secure venues, certainly that's a good thing, right? It's what we should be thinking about. Anybody out west that may be thinking about wildfires, or you're certainly in Texas, thinking about wildfires and how we address the problems. I love that Jack quoted the other day science saying that the average number of acres burned is 100, not 1,000. That's a good thing. But think about what may be causing that. So she mentioned the public safety power shutoffs from folks like PG&E, our utility partners that are out there. But what does that mean for us in public safety? There's a lot of cascading consequences to shutting the power off. Sure, it may not start the fire, but what does it actually do for all the functional needs patients that are out there, for all the infrastructure that we have to rely on? How do we plan for that and think about this? And if it's becoming the new normal for California, plans have to change, operations have to change as well. But I would say that for resilience, because we're talking about this summit being about preparedness and resilience, all those things I just talked about were like these acute shocks, right? These moment in time events that happen that cause us to go into action to respond. But how many of you actually thought about maybe some different challenges that you've got on your plate? These are the slow-moving stressors for society, right? Things that are only exacerbated when one of those shocks happens, like the hurricane or the flood. How many of you are tasked right now or working on homelessness in your community or with partners and starting to ask about that? Yeah, several hands now. You know, when I asked that question 2 years ago, there was no hands. And I would say that people are realizing that public safety with our partnerships and our ability to convene people together and to solve problems and put aside differences is perfect for solving some of these challenges because it takes all of us in public safety to address homelessness, right? From the fire service and medical service side to the law enforcement side to our partners in public works. So more of us are getting asked and pulled into these things that we didn't think we would have to address 2 years ago even. It's just a fact of life. And certainly maybe aging infrastructure. So coming back to Houston, one of the things that we're worried about is how does that infrastructure that's been in place forever, with all the urbanization building around that old infrastructure, driving water into that old infrastructure, make a difference and change the way that water moves through our communities? I'd say this is a problem everywhere, right? Infrastructure in general, the potholes you drove in on the way in and out of here are indicative of that, right? It's just a fact of where we are. And so all of these things together, I think, frame the conversation that we have to think more holistically, we have to think differently to see what others can, in the sense that the way that we addressed these problems yesterday, Hurricane Harvey, wasn't the same hurricane that we'd ever seen before. We never thought we'd see 60 inches of rain. And the hurricane we get tomorrow will be different. So we know that they're getting bigger and better. It's going to take all of us together. So how do we start to do that and transform our processes? Now, this will be probably the most technical slide that I talk about today, I promise. And it's the idea that when we say GIS, I think Jeff, our friend from New Zealand, actually used this in his talk. He said, when somebody said GIS, what was the first thing they thought of? Well, it was a map with some data points on it. So a lot of people think old GIS is maps, and that's not wrong, right? I would say for those of us in GIS, you love it when you used to get the request to help me print a map because you got engaged in the conversation. But that's only one piece of the puzzle, right? GIS as a technology really supports three main things that are so critical for us in public safety. One is obviously that ability to engage with data, right? To visualize it, to see it, to use the applications like Palmetto, and really to help the end users, right? Those operations section chiefs, the first responders, your mayor, your county administrator, to get a sense of what the new normal looks like, to understand how you're addressing that critical problem. But what makes that happen? Well, number one, it's data, right? So GIS as a tenant is a system of record. It is the place where you manage data. It's how you then can expose all that data to those end users in really thoughtful and provocative ways. But it's more than just putting it on a map as data points, right? To make good decisions, you need to analyze, you need to understand the patterns, right? See what others can't. So the third main tenet of a GIS is really this idea that it's a system of insights. Its ability to ask really hard questions of data and to uncover those patterns and trends that help us understand how to position things differently than what we did yesterday. Because our historic knowledge alone is not good enough for tomorrow and the new normal. We have to look at a different way to do this. So that's my technical talk for the day. Let me position that a little bit differently for the operations side and say GIS actually supports three common concepts that I think are so critical for us in public safety. That is the ability to share and collaborate together around information. Because of the new normal, it takes all of us at the table sharing and collaborating to make a difference. The second is that it's going to support better decisions. So we can tell you more than just a point on the map. We can help you understand where there's a hot spot or a cold spot, right? Don't pay attention to that, pay attention here. This is what the forecast looks like against your infrastructure and your resources, where you need to be thinking about changing. And the third part is it gives you the ability to operate in a more agile fashion. So launching mobile applications to do things like the damage assessment, or to create a mobile-first application like Palmetto to allow people to interact with the holistic system of incident management and control. So I want to give you some examples because there's a number of people in this room that are doing this really well. Desiree, is she somewhere in the room looking? Hey, here we go. So you didn't know you were going to get called out, so I'm glad you're here. So Desiree is with the State of Mass at MEMA. So this great example of information sharing is from the Boston Marathon, right? So a special event, one of those things for safety and security, and obviously with Boston having the history that it does around the marathon, is a great example of organizations coming together at all levels of government, both from the state level, the city level, and actually multiple jurisdictions at the local level to share critical information from both a GIS fashion, but also from a business system like CAD RMS fashion, as well as the private sector. So think about the BIB systems that everybody's running with. Working them as they did with the partnership, able to collect those data points in and actually see how the runners are moving through all the checkpoints, the security areas, and progressing along the route in real time. And so I think it's a really good example. This is the end result of that, certainly as a dashboard, kind of providing some metrics, data points along the trackers, how many are moving through the system in general. Now, what's funny about this is that this event in 2018 was really cold, so much like here, just to bring it back to today's weather, was freezing. So hypothermia, right, not just with runners, but also the workers. So the ability to have this type of information that tracked where all the assets and resources from a public safety perspective, as well as the runners, brought a new awareness to what's going on. And it took all of them sitting at the table working around a common map to really get to this level of information sharing. So I thought it was a really good example of information sharing. Now a second one, just to touch on not just acute shocks or these events, is San Bernardino. So in California, obviously homelessness is a major issue. San Bernardino County Sheriff's was one of the key agencies working on this. It started with one person who realized they had a paper process that didn't scale. And he was spending most of his time actually answering calls every day from all the welfare agencies that wanted to provide services to the homeless population. Where are they? When's the last time you touched base with them? Are there new encampments showing up that we should be thinking about? And so they started with just a basic understanding of the workflow and said, hey, we have a paper form. We have a lot of people asking for questions. Why don't we just digitally put those forms on a map, give them a website and let them query that and understand where those people are in real time and securely do that with both our law enforcement partners, our fire service partners, and then let those public agencies that are out there looking for information of where they can apply services for like veteran benefits and the like, know who to target and where to target. This changed the whole process. It literally transformed the organization. It involved not just then the sheriff's department, but also the 10 city PDs within San Bernardino County, as well as all those service providers in general. So another great example of sharing information securely to solve a problem holistically. Now, decision support. So on our front row here is our friends from Arizona. So one of our winners on the past of like putting information together. For those of you that sat in the session on geo-enabling plans yesterday, this was a great example of somebody pulling multiple data sets together, but ultimately then putting it in the context of decision support. So in this case, around the emergency support functions, what's happening in real time for the state of Arizona at the border, right against wildfire and firefighting, and actually making sure that this shows up on the governor's iPad every day with a little bit of a trivia question that drives them through the process because they found out a way to have him engage more on a day-to-day basis. So they use the technology to solve a problem to help them make better decisions about real-time emerging threats and actions, and they do it in the context of trivia and fun. Right? So that's a great example of decision support, and Eric's here from Arizona can certainly talk more about that. Our friends at IFC, so I think Jeff Doolin is somewhere in the room on the side, so our partners at IFC, working on search and rescue activities. So this is a great example of operational agility. How do we train and get a device in the hands of search and rescue operators that are mobilizing out for Hurricane Dorian as an example, to make sure that they can collect information in real time as they do every day on paper forms, and now give them a system of record to put it into, and then allow the mission commanders in the backside to understand what they're seeing in real time, both in surveys for damage, as we're looking at, as well as then missions that they're assigned and looking for where their activity is occurring in real time. Are they missing spots in the community they need to reposition assets and resources to, as an example? So IFC's doing a great job. And then certainly we saw yesterday from New Zealand with INSAROG was a great example of this as well. I think looking at a global scale, it's not just local, but this idea of making operations more agile and supporting the end users, in this case, those first responders that aren't technologists, with a tool that allows them to collect data and still allows good decision support on the backside, is a great example of use of GIS and the technology to support one of those three key capabilities. All right, so I've given you a bunch, right? I've talked a bit about the challenge that we have at hand, how I think GIS as a technology supports it more than just making maps. But you may be thinking, okay, that's great, but where do I start? And if you're on the operations side and you're going back home tomorrow, what do you do first? And so I want to talk about that really briefly here to wrap us up. So my first talking point to all the GIS professionals out there, please don't make this a technology conversation first. Don't start with saying, I have this app or this widget or this tool as a way to start that conversation. Because when we start talking technical challenges like, well, I've got this old technology, I'll have to train some people on that if we do that thing, or it's not working there on the other side, or maybe it's the steps you're thinking, well, I need to upgrade this or that. Like that just takes you down a path that quickly gets messy, right? You're talking about how do I get system architecture, and I think Palmetto did a great job of saying, hey, look, we tried down a pathway and we realized that we were out of sync with some of the business requirements and the mission that we were trying to solve. We got ahead of ourselves in some technology discussions that we weren't quite ready to understand how to implement and sustain that capability long term. So for GIS professionals, please don't start with, I've got a widget or an app. Step back for a minute, right? Let's put it in our pocket. We'll keep the app and the phone away for a minute. Because when you do that, right, so they're immediately going to start asking you questions at the executive level about, well, that's great, but how do you do all these other things? Are we training? How much money is it going to cost? Do you have a program? Is there a plan? This conversation is not where you want to get into right out of the gate. Right? It gets ugly, it gets confusing, and they're going to say, well, that's too complicated, just go make me a map. So let's get out of that conversation. So operators, where do you start the conversation? Let me talk to you for a second on the side. You're critical, right? For those of you that are not GIS professionals, you hold the key to making all of this happen. Every presentation that you've heard to the last 2 days that talked about success, from the chief, you name it all the way down, right, is that operators understand the mission, they understand the organizational challenges, they understand the operational challenges that mission entails, they know where they need help. So for me, you've heard me talk before, I've used this idea of a coffee conversation. I would say, so as a technologist, if you were trying to go back home tomorrow and you're trying to keep all the technology in the pocket for a minute, is go have a cup of coffee with somebody on the operations side of your house that you've had a few interactions with, maybe in past events, and just sit down and talk for a bit. Say, hey, what keeps you up at night? What are you working on right now? And just let it go there, right? Don't try to insert technology. On the operations side of the house, if you've always wondered what that GIS person does in the back of the room, the introvert that sits in the closet and has all the maps on the wall, get a cup of coffee and go knock on the door and say, hey, can we sit down for a second? I just want to know what you do. I've got a couple of things in mind that I want to talk about. This is what I do, right? And let them understand that, right? So we've talked about how you can do that through exercises and bringing people to the table, but this is a personal conversation that needs to happen between the two sides of the house to make change. So focus on the business, right? Where do you start? This is it. You start at the business level. You understand the mission and the vision of your agency. You talk about the challenge you have organizationally and how you want to move forward collectively. Once we've done that, you can put everybody together. So this is the team I want you to go back home and be thinking about on the flight home. Many of you are going to be the technical leadership person for your agency. Some of you may be the executive sponsor or the champion for your agency. But you've got to come together, and this has to be a working group that has a relationship that's willing to call BS and willing to sit down and talk about the hard things and not just get down a technology road. Let's just stop for a minute and get a team together that can work together as champions to move collectively our agency forward. That's digital transformation. So what's the roadmap to do that? So you've got the team together. Where do I go next? So there's 3 things that we've learned at Esri working with organizations around the world, and it's a very simple worded concept. It is what we call how do you build a geospatial strategy, and it is you understand, that's the mission, the vision, that conversation over a cup of coffee is where it starts. Then you plan. You work together to understand what the priorities are, because not everything is a priority 1, and you'll never get to the end of the road if you start hopping around between stuff left and right. You got to have a joint vision of what the priority is for the agency, executive leadership down. And then you act. Now we can introduce some technology to the conversation. Now we start to solve the challenge that's at hand. And then we revisit that and make sure that, hey, have priorities changed, right? A new leadership team comes in, right? A new elected official comes on board, things change. So using this, it's never a one and done. This should be a process that continues. So how do you prioritize? Just some tips here that might help if you've never done this before is you're gonna have a running list on the board of things that you think are great projects, missions where we can make a difference. And I would say together, that team of 3 or team of 2 could sit down and say, let's prioritize that, both on the business value. So, hey, this would really help us. This is gonna change the way that we do business. It's gonna save lives and property, all the way to the ease of launch. Technologists, hey, yeah, I think I have a way that we can start with a widget or an app, and let's configure that because we know it's high. So those things would easily become the quick wins, right? High business value and easy to launch. And you just work your way through the list on every single project that you've identified as a team. And you place them between high value, quick wins. Just start placing them. It doesn't matter, there's no like 1 to 10. Just start throwing them on the board, right? And rank them relative to each other so you understand. And from then you can sequence them and say, great, we're gonna start with the quick wins. We're gonna also start with high value. We're gonna work our way through that and prioritize against that list and start immediately just checking the box. And so when you start checking the box, how do you do that? Well, there's 4 steps to that. The first is that you're gonna prepare. So you're gonna define together what you think the solution is. It needs to be mobile first. It's gotta work in a disconnected environment. We're gonna design that out together and understand, okay, it's gotta be big button because I'm wearing a fat glove and I got fat fingers and it's not gonna work with that little thing you gave me before last time. Those types of things need to come out in the conversation so that the ultimate solution works. Once you've kind of prepared and you understand where you're going, start implementing it. You know, build it out, configure it, test it, put it in operations for a little bit in an exercise, kick it off the table because it didn't work and start over. But start iterating through this. So once you've got that down, you can start to operate, actually putting it into operations. So you execute that solution, get it into practice, train the people that are gonna use it, monitor how it's performing. And don't be afraid, again, to throw the foul flag for a minute and say, let's go back and change something because it's not working like we thought it would. And eventually when you get done and you reviewed all that, celebrate the success that you got because that's a journey. And go back and start on the next project because you got the win in hand. So this process of just understanding, planning, and acting, I think is the key for us to transforming our agency. Not just being innovative, it really is about getting strategic about the way that we do innovation. And it's about measuring that innovation and checking it so that it actually makes a difference, not just throws the new shiny widget or the next new tool out there. Because you're gonna leave this conference with a bunch of ideas of, I saw that, I want that, I wanna go get that, and that's not wrong. But just understand how that fits into your operations, into your vision, into your mission that you have tomorrow. And then start working it in, right? Make changes that make sense to you as a team. Don't feel like the other person's solution is the right solution, because there's no silver bullet in anything that we do in technology. I think we all know that. And if you worked anywhere from Outlook on the web to Office 365 to ArcGIS, there's no silver bullet out there for any of it, right? There's always going to be something you want to change. So just keep working at that together and be a team in the way that you approach it. So just in closing here on the side, I would say I want to leave you with a bit of a thought about why this is so important. I would say that you here are charged with helping your agency now see what others can't. Hopefully as an operations team, you've got a lot of great ideas about how other agencies are approaching problems with GIS and technology. As a technologist, you've heard a lot of great stories and you probably a lot of great mission ideas. So when you go back home, right, and you're saying, well, how do we work together? I just want to leave you with this closing thought, which is that this quote that I'm going to kind of read to you for a minute actually came through an effort that's pulled together every 2 years from the United Nations called the Global Risk Assessment. They basically pull entities around the world together. They talk about emerging threats and challenges. They look at the global landscape. So I'm going to take it out of our room here for a minute and just say, when you go back home and you start to talk to your other friends in the public safety service, your other fire departments that you talk to, they might have heard this story, right? They don't understand how to see what others can't yet like you do. So why is it important? I would say that, let me just read this out loud because I think it's so important to talk to. So the quote, the opening quote for this report says, in this age of data, information, and connectivity, even though we can quantify more of what was previously uncertain, it makes apparent how much more we don't know. What is evident is that change is happening more quickly and surprisingly across multiple dimensions and scales than we ever thought possible. We can no longer use the past as a reliable indicator of the future, and the new risk and correlations are emerging every day in a way that we have not anticipated. I find that really interesting for a lot of reasons, and we can debate that over a cup of coffee later, but what I think is that you actually can anticipate what the new normal looks like. You can anticipate what this will look like to you in terms of resource and management and priorities and mitigation by using technology in a proactive way and transforming the way you think about GIS, not just looking for the next silver bullet innovation tool. So what could you do tomorrow when you go back? Understand, plan, and take action. Understand how you get your team together. Go find the champion, have that cup of coffee, start the conversation there. Plan together, identify how you can start to work as a team and understand the strengths and weaknesses that you both have at the table to meet in the middle on a conversation that you're not going to know as an operator all the technical jargon, and the GIS folks are not going to understand all the operations jargon. So try to keep all those things off the table and just talk about challenges. What's keeping you up at night? Get a plan, prioritize it, and then take action and start moving forward. And don't stop, right? Keep moving forward. Find the quick wins, celebrate them, and keep moving forward. And I think if we do that well, I think we will get to a place where we actually manage innovation for our agencies. We will transform the way that we do business. I think you'll be on the stage next year probably telling your story to everybody else rather than us standing up here. So with that, thank you for the time today. I appreciate it and look forward to chatting more. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. I think that's actually by far the best presentation I've ever seen someone from Esri give.
Hey.
So thank you.
Tell everybody. Tell everybody.
In the least amount of technology, should we say. But yeah, it's a really compelling message, and it fits nicely with what we discussed yesterday, and it ties really nicely with where we're going in some of the sessions this morning and this afternoon. So really perfect tee up there. Thank you.
You bet.
I did want to give folks a chance. Does anybody have any questions for Ryan on seeing what others can't? I see one question up here. There's a microphone coming.
It's kind of more of a request than a question.
Yeah.
We need help with the user interface side.
Okay.
Using Esri products in two ways. One, our audience, particularly even first responders,
Yeah.
the ability to see can be a challenge, whether it's you're wearing gear or just up in age. A lot of Esri products and tools and dashboards have really small font.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's customizable, but it doesn't seem to come out of the box that way. So that's one area where we definitely need some help. And the other is with metadata.
Okay.
We've got some great GIS professionals. It's a very diverse community out there. The metadata is a mix of symbols, codes, decimals, hexadecimals, and the like.
Yeah.
Is there anything that Esri could do to help with either streamlining, following NAPSIC guidance, or something along the lines of how do we best format this metadata, and also not make all of it available right off the bat?
Yeah.
You're over a dot and suddenly your screen is full of gibberish.
Yeah.
That just seems to be the standard rollout out of the box.
Yeah.
I think it's all doable, and definitely not trying to be critical. Just
No, good.
those are two areas we'd love to see some product development.
No, I appreciate it. I think that you hit on two common requests that we get when we talk to public safety, and it's, hey, number one, like I mentioned, the small buttons don't work, the font's not right, the symbology's wrong. There's all sorts of those kind of operational kind of implementation things that we are trying to address. So, my title says solutions, so part of my role at Esri is taking all that core technology we build, the ArcGIS engine, so to speak, and trying to make it work better for public safety. So I would love to sit down and talk like examples. So that's open to anybody here, right? If you have feedback of both how our technology works in an operations standpoint, hey, you have an idea for how to make an app better. So one quick example of how this comes to fruition is that many of you that are using like Survey 123 or Collector, right? It's a mobile application for data entry in the field, either form-centric or map-centric, depending on your choice. We heard that, hey, it doesn't work because it's my fat finger, I'm in a glove. So we came up with a new product called Quick Capture, right? It is, if you've seen it talked about yet, it is a big button interface, and it is for things like a rapid assessment. I'm just driving down the street and I'm dropping points, and it's big button, big button, big button, big button, right? Seems simple, but it takes time for us to listen and learn and make that work. So we're open for ideas, so criticism is always welcome, so feel free to come at us with it. The second part is that every GIS person in the room cringed when you said metadata on the side, like, I don't want to write more metadata. But it is necessary, and it is, one of the three tenets that I talked about for making a true transformation is information sharing. And to do information sharing well, metadata has to be included, right? You want to know that the data you're getting is current, it's authoritative, it's from the right provider. So keeping those things up to date is really critical as we get into information sharing. We are trying to make sure that in our world of sharing, which is our online and ArcGIS Online, that we have a little metadata template, but we are open. I'm happy with product feedback to say, we think it would be nice to have a few additional things. We've added things like mark content as authoritative, so you can actually search and find state of South Carolina as authoritative content, not just what Ryan took from them and made a different map and published it, and now I'm like, is that the one I use? So all open discussion. The last part you'll touched on, I think, was actually not maybe metadata, but more what we call, I think Jeff termed this as maps for humans. And it is, how do you make a map human readable, not machine readable? So when you click a point on a map, it doesn't give you a whole list of attributes of all the stuff and codes and stuff in a database format that nobody cares about. So we have tips on that, so we can certainly maybe a whole nother session about how we could help maps for humans and bring all this together. But that's great comments. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. We have time for one more question if there is one. No? Okay, well, excellent. Thank you.